Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. So this week, we're going to hear who won the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada. The announcement of the winner is on, I believe, September the 10th. There's an organization that was called Centre-Ice Conservatives that I interviewed over the course of the summer that was really quite interesting. And they were really suggesting that there was a need for a more moderate stance, both within the Conservative Party as well as within the Liberal Party. And I think it was the proposition that people that were fiscally conservative but socially progressive didn't have a home either in the Conservative Party or the Liberal Party currently of today. They've recently changed their name. They're now called Centre-Ice Canadians. And so I wanted to reach out to the founder and CEO of Peterson Capital, Rick Peterson, founder of Centre-Ice Conservatives and now Centre-Ice Canadians, and two of his directors, Anne Francis, who is a former lawyer. She's currently an investment advisor, and she is the Conservative candidate of record for Lac St. Louis, and Brian Boulat, who is CEO of a recruiting company in Ottawa, and also a director of the Centre-Ice Canadians. And Brian, I apologize, it's Maxis Recruiting, is that correct?
Correct. Maxis Staffing and Recruiting.
Maxis Staffing and Recruiting. So we got a wealth management expert, a venture capital, private equity expert, and a recruiting expert, all former members of Centre-Ice Conservatives, currently members of directors of Centre-Ice Canadians. So Rick, maybe I could start with you. Why the name change from Centre-Ice Conservatives to Centre-Ice Canadians?
Well, Brian, I'm going to back up a little bit on your intro, just to be clear. There are centrists in the Federal Conservative Party. There are centrists in the Federal Liberal Party. The problem is they've been all pretty quiet, right? They haven't really made enough noise. They haven't really been vocal. And one of the very interesting things on April 27th, when we launched Centre-Ice Conservatives, we chose that name, Brian, because we were all conservatives, right? And we were centrists. So that was pretty easy. Brian being in Ottawa and Anne in Montreal, we had people coast to coast. Our idea was to just speak up, attract people who thought like us, and do it in a nonpartisan way, Brian, in the sense that, listen, we're not going to back any of the candidates as a platform in the federal conservative leadership race. But what ended up happening, it would be like if you opened a lemonade stand and you sold blue lemonade, but everybody said, gee, I love your lemonade, but, I kind of like some red stuff. And we said, yeah, you know what? We had people from the Federal Liberal Party, other people who were not necessarily partisan political supporters, who said, love what you're doing, love your ideas, love your approach, would like to get involved. I just can't because you're wearing the blue sweater of the Federal Conservatives Party. So we had a discussion among ourselves, Brian and Anne, and about 15 others who are part of what we call our advisory council, and the three directors. And we said, hey, what do you think? Should we open this up and call it Canadians? And unequivocally, the answer was yes. And, to conclude, Brian, it's basically our lemonade stand was overrun with interest from people that we weren't expecting. And what we're doing is now offering all kinds of, a single platform, but we're open to voices across the spectrum.
Excellent. And you're a candidate of record for the Conservative Party in Lac St. Louis, which is where? On the West Island of Montreal, is that correct?
Yep. Westernmost tip of the island of Montreal. So what's famously known as the West Island of Montreal.
The West Island of Montreal. I actually was born in the West Island of Montreal, and my friends in downtown Montreal used to call it Beaconsfield, Ontario, not Beaconsfield, Quebec. I think it's become a lot more francophone since then, but that's what it was called then. Yeah. Why would a member of the Conservative Party, a candidate of record, want to be on something called Centre-Ice Canadians?
It's interesting. I actually got involved in politics not that long ago. It was actually right before the 2019 campaign, and it was because I was asked to be involved. And I got involved not to be a politician, but to discuss policy issues. I don't like the politics aspect of being a candidate, but I love talking about the issues and seeing how we can move Canada forward in the right direction. And I got involved because I didn't like the direction Canada was taking. And what I love about Centre-Ice Canadians is that that's what we talk about. We talk about policy. I think Canadians are done a disservice when they get their news from headlines instead of actually reading articles and understanding the issues. And when it comes to elections, it gets boiled down to who has the better headline. And that's really not the case. There's so much to be discussed. A lot of the problems that Canadians face and that the world faces right now are very serious issues. And they deserve a lot more time and effort by our politicians and our policy leaders and policymakers to actually look at what those issues really mean for Canadians and how we can best find solutions and not boil it down to who has the best catchphrase of the day.
Brian Brouillot, I apologize. You, I understand, are supporting Pierre Poilievre in the Conservative Party leadership campaign. Many people think that he's actually taking the Conservative Party to the right, to the extreme right, very populist, and center-right Conservatives or center-right Canadians would actually be in opposition to what Pierre Poilievre is trying to do. Actually, I interviewed Jack Mintz, who wrote an article about your convention back in August, and he said it was like the ghost from Shakespeare that was on top of your conference. That's the way he described Pierre Poilievre, which was kind of interesting. Why would you be supporting center-right Canadians if you're also supportive of Pierre Poilievre?
Well, I don't subscribe to the narrative that Pierre is, extreme right or that he's taking the party in a certain direction. But what I do wish to say is that it's important that people who believe in centrist policies have a voice, and as a voice of advocacy, regardless of which leadership, in this case, leadership candidate that you support, it's important also to bring forward ideas and a depth of discussion, as my colleague just mentioned, in that it's not just headlines, and that we do have a fulsome discussion, because a lot of people are finding that the middle is getting squeezed out. And it's in that light that I feel that myself, I want to participate and also advocate for centrist positions, even if it's with a candidate that some people may perceive as being to the right and extremely so, which I don't. But I think it's important that there is a voice there.
Okay, we're going to take a break for some messages and come back in just 2 minutes with Rick, Brian, and Anne to talk more about centrist policies in Canada versus where the Liberal Party is today and where the Conservative Party either is or appears to be going, depending on who exactly wins the upcoming leadership. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm going to have a lot of fun tonight because I'm really quite interested in this topic, and I think it is really something that we need to discuss, which is there room for people within either the Liberal Party or the Conservative Party, or frankly, the Green Party, the NDP Party, for people that have centrist views? Lots of people have suggested that because of the current leader of the Liberal Party and the association with the NDP, that the Liberal Party has moved to the left. And numerous people think that the Conservative Party, whether it be because of Pierre Poilievre, who looks like he's going to be winning the leadership, and or just because the Conservative Party is no longer the progressive Conservative Party, it's the Conservative Party, and has been influenced by members of the Reform and Alliance that joined up with the Conservative Party. When was it? 10, 15 years ago? I can't remember now. Have moved the Conservative Party to the right. I actually interviewed former Conservative cabinet minister David Crombie, who's not a close relative of mine. He's a distant relative, just to state that. But he said that he didn't leave the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party left him. And it was no longer the progressive Conservative Party that he was a member of. I think Brian Mulroney has at times said comparable things. So it's kind of interesting what's going on, because the guests that I've got on our show tonight formed an organization about 2 months ago called Center Ice Conservatives. And just recently, they've changed the name to Center Ice Canadians. And what they're arguing is that there is room and a need for people of the center. I want to introduce you again to Rick Peterson, who is the founder of Center Ice Conservatives and now Center Ice Canadians. He also is the founder and CEO of Peterson Capital, an Edmonton-based venture capitalist, private equity funding organization, and Francis, who is a private wealth management investment person, and also the candidate of record on the West Island of Montreal, a riding called Lac Saint Louis, and Brian Brouillot, who is, sorry, I do that again, Brouillot, I apologize, who is president CEO of Maxis Staffing and Recruiting, a recruiting agency in Ottawa. I want to pronounce it in a French pronunciation. I apologize for that. Gentlemen and lady, tell me, if you could, if Jean Charest wins the election, most people think that he would be a moderate, and he would be exactly where you're arguing the Conservative Party should go. But if Pierre Poilievre wins the leadership, most people think that he's going to take it to the right. Brian, I understand you're supporting Pierre Poilievre. Rick and Anne, have you taken a stance on the leadership?
Yeah, my two names on my ballot were Scott Aitchison and Jean Charest, in that order. Yeah.
So I have the same names as Rick, but in a different order.
Okay, so maybe Anne, I could ask you.
Sure.
Jean Charest is probably, if polls are right and media is right, going to be in second place, but a far back second place. And a lot of people think that Pierre Poilievre may win on the first ballot. Tell me, why don't you think Jean Charest resonated if what you're arguing in centrist Canadians is that there is a huge number of people in the center of the political spectrum that are supportive of your policies?
I think with any group, whether it's a party or even an organization or even a family, you've got all kinds of members who have, to a certain extent, a lot of views that are similar, but on certain issues, lots of views that are different. And that's the same in the Conservative Party. What I found when I was running in the last two federal elections is that people tend to brush all conservatives with the same brush. And that makes it difficult to have actual policy discussions. I think that's what's being done when there's a leadership campaign as well. People tend to brush the leaders with a brush as opposed to actually listening to what's going on. And one of the reasons why what Jean Charest said resonated with me was his passion for Canada and his desire to do whatever he could to further the interests of Canadians. And that just resonated with me. It's not necessarily because I didn't like the other candidates or didn't like what they were saying on certain issues. I just felt that he really put himself in a place where he could help Canadians, where that's what he wanted to do. And so I find in elections, whether it's a leadership election or a general election, people don't really look at the issues. They look at personality when it comes to a leader, and charisma maybe, and other issues that, while are interesting and maybe are at the forefront, aren't really what matter. I want people to start looking at issues. And I think that's what we're doing with this group.
Rick, why would you pick Scott Aitchison as your number one pick?
I thought Scott, for two reasons. Number one is a policy one. Scott just had the great policies. I just love what he said. I thought he was mature. His demeanor was good. He's against supply management, which I'm 100% against supply management. But I want to back up, Brian, to run for leadership. And I threw my hat in the ring in 2017 and 2020. Brian as well has thrown his hat in the ring on the leadership race. It's hard, man. It is a long campaign. Pierre Poilievre has been setting up and running and grooming himself and his supporters for years on this. So if you combine with the long lead time, the chips he's planted across Canada, and the fact that he's an outstanding communicator, that Pierre Poilievre is an outstanding communicator. You may not like what he's communicating. Nobody gets the message across best from him. He was the prohibitive favorite from the outside. Now, we'll wait and see Saturday night if everybody who showed up to his riding meetings sends in a ballot, because what you got to do, Brian, is you got to get people to take an envelope, photocopy their ID, send it in, return the envelope. It's hard to do. You got to have a good ground game to do it. So the other thing about Jean Charest is a very well-known person, but as I think Anne pointed out, you've got to prepare for these leadership races. And I just think Pierre Poilievre, if he does win, he'll come into this thing ready to go. He's a full-time professional politician. Don't forget, he's done nothing but this for 24 years, and he's ready to go. So I think that much more so than policy, I'm going to disagree with Anne here. It's not policy so much as preparation, and nobody is better prepared for a leadership race than Pierre Poilievre has been this time.
I've heard some criticisms that the entry fee, that the cost of running the leadership, so you mentioned the time, but the cost of running the leadership was very prohibitive and scared off numerous different potential candidates that would have put their names forward. Do you think that the entry fee was too high?
No, I think it was fine. I think if you can't raise money to this amount of money, then you shouldn't be in the race.
But what it does is it limits people to those that probably have created a, if not national profile, close to a national profile, by being probably an elected MP and being able to get across the country and make those connections. For someone that maybe a investment advisor in Montreal or a media personality like myself or something like that. We just can't do it if we haven't been elected to office.
Let me just take that one and then I'll let Brian and Ann talk. But in 2017, I was one of 14 candidates, right? And out of the 14 candidates, only 2 of us weren't elected MPs. One was Kevin O'Leary, who has a slightly higher profile than I do. And even Kevin had a hard go of it. So to win a leadership race, you pretty much have to be a sitting MP, right? And if you're a sitting MP and you can't raise the money that is required to get into the leadership race, then you got an issue and you shouldn't be in it. So I think the rules are fine.
And I think there's a big difference between running for a position like an MP or running for the leader. If you don't have that network already and you're not able to raise the funds, like Rick said, I think that's important. I think it's actually something that they have to take into consideration. And there are some who've been in. I mean, Scott Atchison also put his name in the hat the last time around, and he's raising his profile. So that's another way of doing it. It's bit by bit, not necessarily the first time around, but keep at it and raise that profile and build that network. And like Rick said, Pierre's been doing it for a very long time. So he was ready right off the bat. I think it took him, 3 days after Aaron O'Toole was ousted before he put his name in. So he was ready. He knew what he was doing. And it took time and effort over the years for him to do that. And that might be what it takes.
My understanding is that Peter MacKay, who I thought would have been an incredible candidate, one of the reasons why he didn't run is because he still had debt from the past run. And if someone of Peter MacKay's stature can't raise the money to finance a leadership campaign, who can?
Well, historically, if you look back, the only person who's been an outsider, so to speak, not an MP who's ran and won the leadership is Brian Mulroney. There's been nobody else in the history of the party. Everyone has been a sitting MP outside of that. And I think in terms of Peter MacKay, I can't speak for him, but I think that the last run was had a profound affect on him and his family, and decided that it was for a whole host of reasons not worth it. Now, my 2 colleagues, Ann and Brian, Rick, both mentioned policy for Ann and preparation for Rick. I'd like to add 2 more P's to that. So we'll go with the 4 P's here. We'll have a participation and process. And as a center-ice, conservative, now center-ice Canadian, I think one thing that Mr. Poilievre does bring to the table, and also this organization we have, is one of being center-ice is allowing maximum participation and also a process that allows everyone to be heard, so that we do come up with a centrist type position. We might not agree, we could even disagree, but at least we've allowed everyone to participate and have a process that allows that to transpire.
So Brian, as some of the people that I've spoken to have actually criticized the participation and suggesting that it was almost as if there was a truck convoy or a PPP, I got the name wrong, I apologize, but a Maxime Bernier takeover of the Conservative Party, that they would go to Pierre Poilievre rallies, and the vast majority of particularly the vocal attendees were people that were very supportive of the trucker convoy, and his rallying cry for freedom wasn't a rallying cry that you would typically have heard from the Conservative Party, but it was certainly a rallying cry that you heard from the trucker convoy. So much so that some people have told me that they no longer respect the Canadian flag as much as they did before, because the Canadian flag, because of the trucker convoy, has taken on an image comparable to the Confederate flag in the United States, one of white supremacy, one of exclusion, one of anti-vax, etc. I think you and I talked about this before. I went to Ottawa a couple of months ago and did my own little survey, and every single vehicle that had a flag on it was a truck, and often pickup trucks or SUVs, but a truck, and every single one had a blank Trudeau bumper sticker on it. There was not one vehicle that wasn't a large vehicle that was flying a Canadian flag that didn't have an F blank Trudeau bumper sticker. And it's really a different kind of image that has been associated with the Canadian flag ever since February of this past year. And so therefore people have said the participation has gone up dramatically, but it's gone up with a very right-wing anti-vax crowd, a Maxime Bernier type crowd. and that's been a takeover of that group of the Conservative Party. What do you think of that?
I wouldn't subscribe to that narrative. I think all leadership candidates, including Trudeau and including Mr. Singh, have their militants, the militants, the people that are very excited and excitable that support their leadership candidate in particular. But when you look at the number of memberships that have been sold and the people that have been attracted to the Conservative Party in this case, it's absolutely historic and phenomenal. It's over 700,000 people. So when we're talking about participation, yes, you'll have a sliver, if you will, of people, depending upon who their preferred candidate is for leadership, and regardless of the party, that will be very loud. But when you look at it in a more holistic sense, I think what Mr. Poilievre in this case, or what the Conservative Party is really gravitating to by having over 700,000 participants or memberships sold is, inflation, housing costs, yes, the lockdowns, of course, the policies that are being held, and people want to affirm that they maybe don't agree with what they would describe, some people would describe as left-wing extreme policies. And maybe they see the flag as a rallying point. I really can't comment on specific, convoy issues or individuals or personalities. But what I do know is that there's many, many, many hundreds of thousands of people that find themselves attracted to this leadership campaign. And the reason for that is because they want to see change.
And if I could jump in, sorry,
Yeah.
Rick. On the whole issue of the Canadian flag, again, we're allowing a few voices to drive a narrative in the media, because I think when you look at the Canadian flag, again, when you travel abroad, that flag bears so much respect. And I think it's very disingenuous to say that what happened in February really caused a change in the way people view the flag. I think that's probably not quite fair. I think our Canadian flag is still respected. We have a different relationship with the Canadian flag than the Americans do, for example. You won't find it in front of as many houses in Canada as you would in the States. It's very telling when you drive in the States and you see the American flag everywhere in front of people's homes. We don't do that here as much. It's not part of our culture, but that doesn't mean we don't respect the flag or Canada or what it represents. I think my husband and son are traveling right now in Manchester, England, and they made sure they had Canadian flags on all their bags, and it's still a thing. It's still something that makes us proud to see that.
You're right, but I'll give you another counterpoint. My son had a Canadian flag on his knapsack, was walking through Times Square in New York, which isn't thought of as the most right-wing part of the United States. And he said 3 or 4 times people gave him a high five and said, "Trucker, freedom." So even in the United States, the Canadian flag today has a different image than it did.
If you're looking at the States as the guideline, I'm going to take a step back. I've got family in the States, love them all, but I remember a lot of Americans coming up thinking we all live in igloos. So I wouldn't use them necessarily as the best, ruler in terms of.
Well, just to stay on this for a second, I apologize, but I was in North Battleford, Saskatchewan recently, and I met with 2 different Indian bands, councils. One was an Indian band council for 2 bands, and another one was for 10 bands. And both of them, and they were competing because they were competing band councils. Both of them said they had taken down the flags, the Canadian flag that was in front of the reservation offices, because of exactly what I've said, is that the Canadian flag today to them had indicates something very different. Anyway, my point being that, some people are fearful that the Conservative Party today and a lot of the membership that has grown, that Brian spoke about, has grown because of people that were supportive of the trucker convoy. And, to your comment about the media, I think it was in one of your debates that Dr. Leslie Ann Lewis and Pierre Poilievre were competing about who was more supportive of the trucker convoy. And your candidate, Anne, actually said that the Conservative Party, and I'm paraphrasing here, I'm not going to be exact, but the Conservative Party has been a party of law and order. And if you actually want to be prime minister, you've got to adhere to the laws of the land. And he suggested that Pierre Poilievre wasn't, can't remember the word, but wasn't qualified to be prime minister because he was supportive of the convoy rather than supportive of laws. What do you think of that?
So irrespective of who the leader becomes of the party, I think you're actually making the case for centrist Canadians. You're showing exactly why this type of group exists, exactly why people are gravitating towards this type of an organization, to be able to discuss the things that matter and not get caught up in the hysteria that follows a leadership campaign or a general election. And it's during times when there is no general election and there is no leadership campaign that we actually have to keep this going so that we can discuss, sorry about that, so that we can discuss these issues and actually have wholesome, full discussions. And that's exactly what centrist Canadians is all about. So thank you for making the case for us.
Ryan, let's address the Poilievre enigma. Okay. So this is one of the reasons why centrist Canadians is so good, is Brian and Ann and I can have different views on the candidates, but we're coming from the same spot. So Pierre Poilievre has focused on issues that are absolutely centrist, right? Is it housing? Is it interest rates? Is it inflation? Got it, right? Where the issue comes is more his tone, the name calling, the sarcasm, the conspiracy accusations, that tone comes across. I think Susan Riley at the Hill Times, yesterday were to call him, he seems to some people that he's kind of unhinged and unrealistic, and it is what it is. But people ask me and they say, hey, can Pierre Poilievre pivot back to the center? He's made it really hard, because if Pierre Poilievre makes an open move to the center, it'll make Aaron O'Toole's pivot look like a little trip into the flower garden, right? But what Pierre Poilievre could do, and this is to Brian's point, and this is very interesting, the world's changed, Brian, in terms of demographics, in terms of people that are being active. And I think as Brian hit it on the nail on the head, there are people who are now interested in participating in politics, and Pierre Poilievre has approached them. I read a story yesterday. Labor union support is coming from, the biggest support is from are they Gen Zs, 20 to 25, 26? So what you're seeing is youth activism at the ends of the spectrum, and we'll see where that leads. But to Ann's point, our voice is more important than ever, because guess what? The 51 seats in the GTA and the 78 in Montreal that decide who gets elected are decided by people like us who come out, who vote. And so this is going to be a fascinating time. If Pierre Poilievre wins, he will have merited it and deserved it. If Jean Charest wins, that comes back to show you that, his brand of conservatism still resonates enough. We'll wait and see. But irregardless of who the leader is, centre-race Canadians has a more important role than ever to bring these voices out, because these are the ones that elect governments.
We're chatting with Rick Peterson, Anne Francis, and Brian Brulat tonight about centre-race Canadians. And is there a need for more policies, more parties, more people in the center of the political spectrum? Has the Liberal Party gone too far to the left? Has the Conservative Party already, or in the future, if Pierre Poilievre gets elected, gone or going too far to the right? We're going to be back with these two gentlemen and lady in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're having a conversation tonight with Rick Peterson of Peterson Capital, and Francis, who is the Conservative candidate of record in Lac St. Louis and an investment advisor, and Brian Brulat, who is the head of Maxis Staffing and Recruiting in Ottawa. All three are directors of Centre-Ice Canadians, which is a new renamed organization that used to be called Centre-Ice Conservatives, that have been arguing that there's a hole in the middle of the Canadian political spectrum for, I think we would describe it as fiscal conservatives, social progressives that aren't being represented currently by either the Liberal Party or the Conservative Party, and or it'll even be worse if the Conservative Party elects Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party moves even farther to the right. And maybe I could ask you, or Rick, I could ask you, some people think that if Pierre Poilievre wins, Jean Charest will start a new party. And or some people, Rick, have suggested that Centre-Ice Canadians could be a brand new party of the center. And lots of people look to, France and the move of both major political parties in France to the right and to the left, and that the current president created a brand new party out of nowhere, and just a month ago was elected to a second successful term.
Yeah,
what do you think
three
the
short.
future is?
Yeah, three short points on that, Brian. These are really easy to answer. Then I'll turn it over to Anne and to Brian. France is different. France has no established political parties. Political parties form and fold every couple months according to who the leader is. So it was a fortuitous time with Macron. Yes, he did have an opening in the center. So that is not similar to Canada in terms of the fluidity of the political parties. Okay. Secondly, I would rather have 338 root canals than setting up 338 riding associations across Canada, which you have to do to form a national party. So we didn't start this to form a party. Nobody here has an interest in it, but we do have an interest in trying to influence the party. Third thing, can't speak for Mr. Charest, but I think that it's been an interesting debate. I think it's been an interesting leadership race, and whoever wins coming out of Saturday night, centrist conservatives will be leaning big time on that candidate to try to move in our direction.
And
Oh, I totally agree with Rick. I'm very fortunate to have a fantastic riding association in the West Island. They're dedicated, committed people, but I've had to deal with other riding associations. It's very difficult to put that kind of ground game in place and to do it across the country and make a national party. I think the people involved in Centre Ice Canadians really want to talk about policy and influence policy, irrespective of who's in power, irrespective of who's the leader of which party. It really is to say, don't forget the center. We are actually the majority, and we may be quieter than some of the fringe elements, but we're here and we've got a voice and we've got a lot of very important points that have to be made. And that's really what it's all about for me, at least.
Rick wants to influence the ultimate leader of the Conservative Party to move to the center. Yet, and he said that Jean Charest wasn't even eligible to run because he was a liberal premier of Quebec, didn't he?
Who said
So
that?
again, extremely disingenuous, because if you live in the West Island, as you did, you know that West Islanders and Montrealers in general vote Liberal for lots of reasons. And the Liberal Party provincially is actually much more aligned with the Federal Conservative Party than any of the other parties. So we have to be careful. Again, these are names and labels that people put and ascribe meaning to, but you actually have to dig a little and understand what's behind those labels and what's behind those names and why are they that way. And so I will be very honest, I have voted provincially Liberal because I don't have a choice here in Montreal. There is no other way to vote. Any other vote provincially is a vote against Anglophones, if you will, or has been traditionally. Maybe that's changing somewhat in the past few years and as we see different parties come up. But provincial politics and federal politics, very, very, very different. And I would caution people to really look and see what's behind those parties. Just the fact that the names may be similar does not mean that they're similar in any way, shape, or form.
So I was a riding president of a Liberal Party provincially in British Columbia.
Condolences.
And similarly, I think to Quebec, the Liberal Party in British Columbia is not at all consistent with the federal Liberal Party. It has got social credit members, it's got conservative members, and it's got federal Liberal members.
So you know that the former leader and premier is now with Centre Ice Canadians Advisory Council, right? Brian, you know that, right? Christy Clark
I do. And so therefore, right? You know, I wonder, you know, it's almost disingenuous for Pierre Poilievre to use the fact that Jean Charest was a Liberal premier. You know, he would more than almost anyone know that the Liberal Party of Quebec and the Liberal Party of BC are not capital L federal Liberal parties.
Brian, come on, you've been around long enough. It's politics, it's campaigns, and leadership. You know, people sling things around, and then when it's all over, we try to move on. You've seen that,
but the vast majority of people don't know what we're talking about.
Well, you know,
that's why we're here.
They're going to listen to Pierre Poilievre, and they're going to say,
that is why we're here. We're here to make that point. We're here to show people there's a lot more than just those headlines and just those catchphrases. And there is a lot more after this leadership race is over. There will be a lot more work for us to do, actually. And I'm looking forward to that. That's actually what I'm looking forward to.
So Brian Crombie, I'd like Brian Burlock to chime in here, because you know what? Brian lives in Ottawa. So that's the bubble. That's where you guys get all your information from. And, you know, that's where you guys, the media echo is kind of the same. You guys follow the same stories, except for you. You're an outstanding broadcaster. But I think if I ask Brian, you know, Brian's got a military background, private equity or private sector background, and he's very involved in politics. I think the difference Brian, between what resonates in Ottawa and around the media spin here and what's out in the real world addresses what Anne just talked about. And Brian, you see this every day, right?
Absolutely. The fact is, what happens inside of the bubble here is utterly different than what you hear out in the road. I have, as you may know, I have 15 offices across Canada, from Halifax to Vancouver. And what I hear on the road and when I'm talking to people, on the plane or on the train or at the bus stop, it's totally different than this.
Yeah.
And to Brian Crombie's initial remark, about Liberals and the remark that Pierre Poilievre said, listen, all leadership campaign candidates in the heat of the moment say things that, 3 months later, once leadership is over, are promptly forgotten and hands are shaken and we come out as one big team.
Yeah, you say that, and I accept it to a certain extent, but I've heard from numerous different people that the reason why Aaron O'Toole lost and was ousted so quickly is because you couldn't trust what his policies were. That the flip-flop or the pivot to the center was so substantial that you just didn't you couldn't be confident in where he stood, and that if he had stayed right where he was elected, it would have been better. And I worry that Pierre Poilievre has gone so far to the right and to the extreme, and let's be frank, supporting conspiracy theories in regards to the World Economic Forum and things like that, that it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, for him to move to the center and do what you guys are arguing that you want him to do. He's talked about firing the governor of the Bank of Canada. He's talked about using cryptocurrency as a hedge against inflation, which is down something like 70% or something in the past year. He has been very supportive of the trucker convoy. He has attracted numerous different members to the Conservative Party. Some people think that are primarily anti-vaxxers and supportive of conspiracy theories and the trucker convoy. And Brian, I have talked to numerous people in Ottawa who said that if Pierre Poilievre's riding was in Ottawa, not in the Ottawa Valley, he wouldn't even get reelected. That Ottawa residents think so negatively toward the trucker convoy, that they call the trucker occupation, and Pierre Poilievre's support of that if his riding was in downtown Ottawa rather than in very western Ottawa Valley, he wouldn't get reelected.
Well, geography and where you get elected, are quite are issues that don't change. You'll never get an NDPer voted onto the West Island. You'll never get, a Liberal voted in the region of, for example, Alberta and certain areas, most areas of Alberta. So geography notwithstanding, I don't subscribe to the extreme narrative, but I think, the reason that we have this organization, Center Ice Canadians, is to look at policies, to talk about process, getting inclusivity, in terms of people being able to voice their opinions and not getting stuck, as Anne had mentioned earlier, on headlines and kind of one or two sentences that people say. We have to dig deeper and try to come across with a big tent and go back to where the most Canadians are, and that's in the center.
Right, you know what? We started an April 27th, and guess what? We held a sold-out conference, live streamed across Canada in Edmonton, August 11th, a couple months later. We're already planning, and it's organized. We're going to have a conference in Halifax on October 28th. But look who's come to these things. Like, it was Jack Mintz who turned to me in the panel discussion, and he says, "You guys should change your name, Center Ice Canadians," right? But like Jack Mintz and everybody who came to that conference, we didn't pay them to come. They just came on their own dime from across Canada. And then I guarantee you're going to see some blue Liberals at our conference in Halifax. So rather than labels, why don't you watch, I think we have to watch what people do, not the labels on them, right? So whether people say, "Oh, you're Center Ice Canadians, you guys have stepped away from the Conservatives." No, we've actually stepped up. But watch what we do, to Brian's point, right? Watch what we're going to do. Pierre Poilievre, what he said, okay, that's fine. If he's the leader, let's wait and see what he does, right? So at the end of the day, to resonate beyond the base that elects a leader, that's where elections are won or lost. And it's still up in the air, but also keep in mind, Jean Charest could still win this thing, right? Jean Charest has got a lot of votes in Quebec. Pierre Poilievre got great crowds across Canada. You know, did they all vote, and did they all vote in areas where the way that the system, where the numbers, you only get 100 points. If you've got 5,000 members in Calgary Nose Hill, that counts as much as 125 members in, you know, Quebec City or somewhere, right? So it's up in the air. We'll have to wait and see, but
Elections matter, right?
elections matter.
We've got to believe that they
Absolutely.
matter.
So Rick, let's talk about blue liberals for a second.
Yeah.
You're saying that you're attracting some blue liberals
Yep,
to
yep.
center race Canadians. Some people think that the Liberal Party, particularly the Liberal Party under Justin Trudeau, has moved to the left. Tell me what you think the opportunity is there for either blue liberals and or for center race Canadians.
Massive, massive, massive. I have to respect the confidentiality of phone calls that have come in. I've had former Liberal federal leadership candidates, former cabinet ministers, former national directors, riding association people call me, very interested. They've signed up. Look at what the Trudeau Liberals have done. Lots of really good things. He's captured the center, but look at the progressive move. Look at you know, the alliance with the NDP. I mean, my gosh almighty, Brian and Ann and I are from the private sector. And you know, the thing that just horrifies us and people we know is the debt. Look at the debt. Interest rates went up 75 basis points. Brian, we're recording this on Wednesday morning. The Bank Canada rate went up again. And, you know, it's not the Bank Canada governor, with all respect to Mr. Poilievre, it's the money that's flooded in post-pandemic. We got to deal with that stuff. And there are liberals who are wringing their hands saying the Trudeau Liberal Party is not my party. So the Morneaus, the Paul Martins, the Jane Philpotts, all these people, right? I'm not saying they're all calling us, but there is a vacuum in the middle of center left and center right Canadians, and that's why we're calling ourselves centrist Canadians.
So Morneau, the former finance minister, actually made a major speech that you're undoubtedly aware of, where he said that we've lost the growth agenda, the productivity agenda, the prosperity agenda of late. Is
No
that
fiscal
an opportunity for you?
100%. 100%. We're focusing on, if you looked at what we talked about at the Halifax or at the Edmonton conference, we talked about growth. We talked about productivity. Andrew Coyne pointed out something that you and I didn't know. The productivity that we have in Canada, in other words, the efficiency we have to develop goods and services, is about like 18th in the world. I mean, like, we really suck at making products that sell competitively. Now, I'm 67, so I'm at the end of the, you know, I'm at the baby boomers that we're heading out. But here's what's going to happen. You can get away with that for a certain period of time. But at a time of labor shortage and a time of being, you know, competitive with the rest of the world, we cannot afford it. So by the time Anne gets to be my age, there'll be nothing there for her healthcare services.
We're chatting tonight with Rick Peterson, Anne Francis, and Brian Brulat of Center Race Canadians. We're going to take a last 2-minute message break and be back with some concluding comments in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Fascinating conversation. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guests tonight are Rick Peterson and Francis Brian Brulat. Rick is the founder of Center Race Conservatives, that's now called Center Race Canadians. I wanted to ask each one of these individuals who they thought was going to win on Saturday, who was going to be their competition in the next federal election. And Brian and Rick have all told me, no, that's not what they want to talk about. They want to talk about policies. And so therefore, I'm going to ask you instead, each one of you, if you were Prime Minister of Canada, what would be the one first big thing you would do to change Canada? Let's start with Brian, then go to Anne, and then finish up with Mr. Rick Peterson.
Oh boy, that's it. I get to step up first. Okay. I think the most important thing is our economic policy. There's no question in my mind that if it comes to questions of innovation, investment, productivity, extracting our mineral resources, that is the number one question of the day, because it has such long-term downstream effects, positive effects for the country.
Anne.
So I agree with Brian, but I think the focus has to be a bit more on families. I think we are doing a disservice to families. We're not supporting them enough. There are a lot of things that are going on, and part of it is economic, part of it is everything that's happening with the pandemic, part of it is healthcare, part of it is so many things that the government isn't doing, and it's not being supportive of families and understanding what families really need in order to be successful. They are still the backbone of our society. They are still the pillars of raising our kids and providing for them and allowing them to be healthy members of the society, contributing and doing a lot more. So we really do need to provide much more support for families.
Awesome. Rick.
I take my best policy ideas from my veterinarian. I got 3 golden retrievers, so I go and see her often and she tells me about her business. And I would jumpstart the Canadian economy by eliminating the federal corporate income tax, take it to 0, so that my veterinarian and other small business owners can expand, can hire people, and can increase the productivity, create jobs, tax revenue, and money that we need to help support people like me who are going into retirement.
Well, I'll give you mine. And it's going to be surprising, I think, to you all, because you probably all think that I'm more left than the balance of you. But I think that our fiscal situation is not sustainable. I really worry that we've gone from a situation where we've had 4 or 5 working people for every one person in old age pensions, et cetera. And we're going to move to 2 in about 5 years, 2 people in the workforce to every one person that is being supported. And I don't think that is sustainable, particularly as more people have longer life and live longer. And I really worry that we're not thinking that through. And I think Rick pointed out that we've got more debt today than we've ever had before. I think it's something that's occurred around the world. And so it's not completely unique to Canada, but it is a challenge that we need to address. And I think that the inflation that we've encountered in the last year is symptomatic of that. And I think it's something that we need to address. And I really worry that if we don't address it, we're going to have a Canadian peso crisis like we did in the 1990s. And so
Brian,
I think that's what we need, a fiscal conservative that hopefully has a social progressive side to them that should be the next leader of whatever party forms the next government.
On behalf of Brian and Ann and I, we'd like to extend an invitation for you to join the Center Ice Canadians Advisory Council. We do need a media representative in the heart of Canada, and we'd love to have you on board with your views and ideas.
I accept the invitation. That's our show for tonight. Thank you to Rick Peterson, head of Peterson Capital, Anne Francis, an investment advisor and the candidate of record in La St. Louis, and Brian Borlett, who is the head of Maxis Staffing and Recruiting. All of them directors of Center Ice Canadians, looking for someone that plays in the center of the ice. That's our show for the night, everyone. You can get me every night at 6 o'clock, Monday through Friday at 9:60 a.m. And you can stream me online from the West Island of Montreal, from Edmonton, or from
Ottawa
at www.saga960am.ca. Good night, everybody.